Good morning, Highlands, Presbyterian. Today we are in Luke 18. I'm going to be reading from the Message translation again. Jesus told them a story showing that it was necessary for them to pray consistently and never quit. He said, "There once was a judge in some city who never gave God a thought and cared nothing for people. A widow in that city kept after him. 'My rights are being violated. Protect me.' He never gave her the time of day. But after this went on and on, he said to himself, 'I care nothing what God thinks, even less what people think. But because this widow won't quit badgering me, I'd better do something and see that she gets justice. Otherwise, I'm going to end up beaten black and blue by her pounding.' Then the master said, 'Do you hear what the judge, corrupt as he is saying? So what makes you think God won't step in and work justice for his chosen people, who continue to cry out for help? Won't he stick up for them? I assure you he will. He will not drag his feet. But how much of that kind of persistent faith will the Son of Man find on earth when he returns?'" It's the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So, some 500 years ago, there was a writer whose works have proven to be mildly successful over the years, right? A few of William Shakespeare's plays have survived to this day. And you may have heard of a little love story called Romeo and Juliet, right? A story of forbidden love and the consequences it has on the lives of those two, as well as on the community. And there's this famous scene, maybe one of the most romantic scenes of all time, right? This balcony scene where Romeo comes to Juliet's balcony, and this language is compelling, it's romantic, it's dedicated. Right? Juliet warns Romeo he might die if discovered within the walls of her family's house. And Romeo says he would rather die than live without Juliet's love. Right? Juliet asks Romeo how he found her house. And he says it was love itself that guided him there, love that gave him strength to leap over the wall. And as the scene draws to a close, Juliet asks, what will satisfy Romeo? He says, only the reply of her faithful vow of love to match his own. Juliet answers she gave it long before he requested it, and yet she will do it once more, for her love is as deep as the sea, and the more love to him she gives, the more she finds. It is infinite, right? And this is, I love, right, because we look at this and we see that all of our best stories are rooted in Scripture. Right? Who else gives love before it is requested? Who has love deep as the sea? Who has an infinite amount of love? Right? All of our best stories, all of our best movies, they point back to Scripture because they're rooted in God's love, right? The same story over and over again. Right? Because it's these themes that God has planted in our hearts. And so we're lifting up these same themes because we're aching for them to tell the story over and over again, right? So Romeo and Juliet, this beautiful scene of love, and Romeo goes away thrilled by this idea of her having this infinite love for him, right? He finds joy, he finds peace in her affirmation. But imagine if we blended, right, Romeo and Juliet in our scene from Luke 18, right? Imagine him having leapt the wall, risking his life just to speak to Juliet, confessing his endless love for her, right? Imagine the scene. I have night's cloak to hide me from their eyes, but if you love me, let them find me here. My life were better ended by their hate, and death postponed, denied of your love. And then imagine Juliet's reply, though I have no care for love and don't even like you, Romeo, yet because you keep bothering me, I will love you, so that you won't wear me out by your constant appearances, right? It softens the heart, right? It's not very romantic. The end result is the same, but the spirit of it has changed just a little, right? And so this is the circumstance that Jesus presents us with in today's story. There's this judge. Judge doesn't fear God. Judge doesn't respect people. And he's being constantly hounded by this woman, and she's demanding justice. See, when a woman in those days, when her husband died, the property passed to the son or to the son-in-law. So widows had to fight for everything. And so this particular widow, right, is hounding this judge. And this language is taken from the world of boxing, right? The judgment, right, otherwise I'm going to end up black or blue, beaten black and blue by her pounding. Right? The judge doesn't give in to the widow's demand out of love or admiration for the widow. He doesn't give her justice because he thinks it's the right thing to do, or because he's outraged at the idea of injustice. He grants her justice to shut her up, so that she won't continue to bother him. He wants peace, he wants quiet back in his life, and he thinks the only way to do it is to give this woman what she asks, so that she will go on her way. Right? It doesn't leave us feeling satisfied, right? It's a good result for the woman. The end result is the same as if the judge had done it with this great sense of justice rather than weariness. And so what is happening in the story is Jesus is lifting up qualities of God. He's trying to show us that God has a heart for justice, that God has a heart for compassion. And in this story, he's trying to teach us how important it is that we reflect that justice and compassion in our own life. And so what Jesus is saying, right, is this is an incompetent judge who doesn't care at all for people. And even he manages to reflect God's justice, even though his motives are wrong. Even though the method isn't admirable, even he gets it wrong. And so how much more, right, should we who love God, who admire God, who want to imitate God, how much more should we seek out justice? Right, the book of James tells us that true religion is caring for widows and orphans. Right, this is the religion, is what Jeremiah is telling us, that will be written on the heart of every believer in the end. Not just the remnant, but every single person will know the Lord. Right, it's this movement. At first, Jeremiah is saying there's a few who are circumcised in heart, but at the end, Jeremiah says everyone will be circumcised in heart. Everyone will seek justice for the widow. Everyone will seek justice for the orphan, because that reflects God's will. And so if this judge manages to do it without caring for people, how much more should we seek justice? How much more should we reflect compassion, right? The judge is he's the proverbial blind squirrel, right, that finds a nut every now and again. Modern times, it's sort of like me trying to drive a golf ball, right? Every once in a while, it goes straight. Right? The judge's eyes, right, they've been closed by indifference to God and people. And so we who love God, we who love people, we should have open eyes, right? Which is one of the prayers that we should be praying, is God, open the eyes of my heart. That's what Jesus is teaching us, right? In reading the Gospels, right, it's hard to miss Jesus' love of the poor, of the outcast, right? We often, right, we sometimes try to sneak around it, but Jesus keeps putting it squarely right in front of us, challenging us to do something about the situations, the injustices that we see in the world. Right? Jesus can teach us anything about God. Right? This is the God who made the stars, who holds the world in God's hand. This is the God who will determine what happens at the end of times. And what Jesus chooses to teach us over and over again is God's compassion and God's love and God's seeking justice for the outcast, for the forgotten. And so Jesus is telling us that we who love God, we should show God's love by loving the poor, by reaching out to the outcasts, by serving the widows. Right? The story of our lives, it's not one that's just about us. It's about how we love and serve God and how we put that love into action, right? Compassion, right? Compassion is love of God in action. And so the question is, how is that compassion made real in our lives today? That's the question that Jesus has for us. Thanks be to God.